Hi, I'm Will Johnson, also known as Power Nerd Insights. I work as a Senior Power Platform Specialist for Vantage 365, and I'd like to welcome you to this Power Nerd presentation.
Hello and welcome to this week's Friday session in the Power Apps Challenge Discord server. My name is Will Johnson. I will be presenting this week's session. I have been a Power Platform senior developer for the past 4 years, coming up to 5 now, currently working at a company called Vantage 365. I run these sessions to try and teach those within the community about what we do as Power Platform developers, but also as a way to kind of pass on that knowledge and help everybody learn. This week's session is a bit of a different one. We're actually not really going to be looking at Power Platform as a whole. We're going to be looking at tools that are adjacent to Power Platform that we as Power Platform devs use to make our jobs run a little smoother, our development processes run a little quicker, and some things that just make the difficult parts of kind of working in things like Power Platform just that bit a little bit easier. So we do have a what looks to be a long agenda, but hopefully won't be too long. So we have the introduction. That's where we are now. Hi. Um, we're actually going to be covering three separate useful tools, but one of these is a toolbox, which, as you can see on the agenda, is XRM Toolbox, a relatively well-known thing among Power Platform devs, but something you might not have seen before as it is technically third-party software. We'll be looking at an overview of what XRM Toolbox is, what it does, and then we'll be looking at 6 of the most commonly used tools that I work with pretty much every day when working in Power Platform and developing solutions. We're then going to be looking at 2 websites that I use to look at kind of design ideas in terms of the PnP Power Platform samples area, and the PCF Gallery, which is a brilliant community project that provides the capability for you to look at Power Apps, Power Platform component framework components. So these are code components that are ready made by members of the community and that you can download and then work with. So before we launch into the content and we start looking at XRM Toolbox, we do have our usual rules of engagement. I only have one rule when it comes to these sessions. We are all here to learn, okay? We all want to find things out and figure this out. So my one rule is that there is no such thing as a stupid question. I firmly believe in this rule. I've yet to find a stupid question. If someone doesn't know the answer or you feel like you're out of the loop, please do ask. It's what we're here for. We're here to learn. We're here to teach, and we're here to pass on that knowledge. We do normally have a discussion section at the end of these kind of live sessions. So if you have any questions and you want to ask them out loud on the stage, please feel free to wait until the discussion section and bring them up on stage. But if you have any questions that you want to ask during the course of the session, you're more than welcome to drop them in the chat, and we'll get to them when we get to that discussion session. So, with that being said, we're going to start with the very first thing on our list, which is XRM Toolbox. Now, as the title suggests, this is a toolbox. It is not a single tool. XOM Toolbox is a third-party open source kind of collection of tools that have been produced by the community that Microsoft themselves recommend for usage. Okay, we're actually going to get to see what XOM Toolbox is, what it does in a moment, but it is worthwhile noting that this is heavily used within the community and contains a lot of really, really useful tools. We're only going to be covering 6 of them today, but for anybody who's interested in working in the Power Platform space, I would really recommend you dive into the XRM Toolbox and see what you can get access to. So with that being said, we're going to look at what XRM Toolbox is. So XRM Toolbox is something you download online. This is the downloaded version here. So this is what I use to access tools. As you can see, I've got a load of recently used tools that I've dug into, and I've got my favorites. My favorites are what we're going to be looking at. But what we need to understand for this is, what is XOM Toolbox? Well, very simply, like I said, it is a community kind of project in terms of a way to provide tools that drive productivity in terms of development and make customizing things like Microsoft Dataverse and in some cases Dynamics 365 instances a lot easier. There is a tool library over here, which you can see under the quick actions. If I click on that, we get a full list of all the tools that are available. Now, obviously, when we scroll through them, we can see there are a lot. If I were to cover every single one of these today, we would be here for a long, long while. So we're just going to cover kind of some of the core ones. But if you want to be able to use XOM Toolbox, you download it from the XOM Toolbox site. It's very easy to find if you search XOM Toolbox on Google or your preferred kind of search provider, then you'll be able to pick it up and download it. So that's our tool library there. So that's the list of tools. These are the tools that I have installed. But each one of these tools will do something slightly different. But before we're actually able to use those tools, when you first come into working with XOM Toolbox, you'll need to configure a connection. Now, I've got a number of connections already configured, but if you want to create a new connection, you need to come into the configuration and choose Manage Connections, or choose Manage Connections over on the right here. And you'd set up a new connection by hitting the little plus button there, or the wand button there, and then being able to do it. For today, I'm just going to use my dev tenant that I've got here. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit login on that, of course. And what you'll see basically it connected. Now, once you're actually connected, it'll say that you have the option to impersonate, to open Maker, or open the environment. These options up here are really useful in terms of the open environment. It's going to open up the web browser to that environment. If I choose Open Maker, it's going to take me to my Power Apps environment there. But there's one button on here which is exceptionally useful, which is the Impersonate button. Now, what the Impersonate button does is it opens up a pop-up which allows you to search for a user and then act as that user and with those users' permissions inside of that environment. So let's say right now I am a system administrator. If I wanted to interact with the tools that are within XOM Toolbox as, let's say, just a basic user and see what they have access to, you can do that using the impersonate function. And it's really, really useful to know that, because some of these tools are things like Access Checker, which allows you to check the user's access to certain data or tables, and a bunch of other things as well. So really important to understand that that impersonate button is up there. But that being said, we are now actually going to dig into some of the tools rather than the toolbox and its setup and usage. So the first thing we're going to look at is one of my personal favorites, the bulk delete tool. Now, when we work in Dataverse, there is an option to run bulk delete jobs on data. These are currently configured through the classic view. They're sometimes a bit tricky to manage. The bulk delete tool makes this a lot easier. So if I actually click into it, what I'm going to get is a nice little interface here where I can actually turn around and select a specific table. So let's say for the account table, it's going to retrieve that view. What I can do is I can use either custom fetch XML query, which I could write myself, or I could use a very specific view. So I can target the bulk delete against a view. And let's say I wanted to clear out all accounts. I click on all accounts. It puts that fetch XML query in there, and then it does it in batches of 200. If I then hit validate query, deleting records will permanently delete those records. I hit delete records. What this is now going to do is go away and do that bulk delete for me. Now, the reason why this is really powerful is because, one, it's quick, two, it's easy, but three, if you are dealing with an over bloated dev or test environment and you want to target the bulk deletion of that pretty quickly, you're able to queue these up very, very fast. So you select your entity, you select your view, you choose the validate query, you hit delete records. But alongside that, if you want to be able to run a bulk delete on a very specific set of records and you maybe don't know how to build fetch XML queries, hey, you can now use views inside of your entity to be able to run that bulk delete query from this tool, making it a lot easier to do that clear out. So, to that end, making it that bit simpler, making that bit quicker saves us time as a dev. I regularly have to do clear outs of dev and test areas that have become over bloated with records, and this makes that easier. So that is the bulk delete tool, one of the 6 tools that we're going to be reviewing today. Very simple, very easy, just providing that low code kind of interface to be able to run bulk delete jobs. The next tool we're going to be looking at is the Dataverse REST Builder. Now, this moves into the space of maybe when you're starting to look at web resources as a Power Platform dev in terms of extending the capabilities that are within your model-driven apps or kind of against model-driven app forms a little bit, and you start getting into the bit where you're using web resource scripts and JavaScript to be able to perform functions. Or maybe you're working with plugins and you need to be able to use the Dataverse REST API endpoints, but you don't know them too well. Well, Dataverse REST Builder actually is a tool that makes the identification of those endpoints and the setup of them a lot easier. And if anybody's used Postman before in terms of that kind of API endpoint piece, you might be quite familiar with how this works. But quite simply, what it does is if I hit new collection here, and I look at my new request, I have an option of a load of request types. Now, these are the request types that are available to us in the Dataverse web API. So I can turn around and say, hey, I want to retrieve a single record. You then have a configuration panel here, and you can say, yeah, I want to use version 9.2. It's going to be asynchronous or synchronous. I'm not going to use an impersonate. I want it to run as, just itself. And I want to get all the account. I want to get a record from the account record. And this is, as it does say, this is a long-running operation in terms of retrieving that table information. But what it does is it then gives me a drop down in the columns. So now I'm going to go, I want the account name, I want the account number, I want the account rating. And, do you know what? I want a relationship about, let's have a look. Let's go account chats and say from the chat table, the Teams chat table, I want activity type actual duration. So just selecting based upon those relationships what I want to pull from related items, and then primary ID. I want this account here. That's the record I want to retrieve. All well and good. We've now configured what we want to retrieve. You'll see that there's these tabs along the top here. Well, actually, if I go into xom.web API, right there, this Dataverse REST Builder has built the code I would require to be able to retrieve a single record. I could copy and paste this into my web resource and be able to then use it. We've got things like XOM Web API execute. But the other really useful thing is Power Automate over here. So it's saying, hey, use a get a row by ID action, put the table name in, put the row ID in, put the select columns in, and there's your expand query statement. So right there, immediately, it's given us what we need to work in web resource scripts using xom.web API, xom.web API execute, and then also in Power Automate as well. Here's the other fun thing. It does provide fetch XML as well. So we can create our fetch XML from here. Very quickly allowing us to target those web APIs in a low-code interface and be able to do things. Now, when we look at this, if I change, let's say, the retrieve single to an execute action option, you see here, it goes same options. We can choose it against an unbound action. And let's say I want to, I don't know, use the AI classify or AI extract actions that are available to us in the Dataverse Web API, or bulk detect duplicates. This gives me the option to basically choose an unbound action or a bound action to be able to do things with it. Now, when we look at this, again, similar situation, we choose an action. We then choose the optional parameters, go to XOM Web API, and there we go. We've got the code. So again, very quickly speeding up, rather than having to write all this myself, I run the configuration here. I come to XOM Web API, or whether I'm using fetch or jQuery, I'm then able to just copy the code and put it directly into my web resource scripts and make use of it. And then in terms of obviously where it works in kind of collections, he says, you can come to file and you can go, hey, I want to export it as a Postman collection. So now you can bring it into Postman. All well and good. So again, this one is another tool that's designed to just speed up that development process when we're working with pro code elements in terms of web resource scripts and when we need to query Dataverse REST API endpoints, and give us that ability to then be able to do that in multiple areas, including XOM Web API calls, and in certain cases, be able to just pull it directly from things like Power Automate or Fetch XML. Some of them do also have Power Query elements as well. But that is the Dataverse REST Builder. This one is one I use pretty much every day at the moment. Very, very useful. And then on the next tool, Entity Relationship Diagram Creator. Now, I am a big kind of proponent for, before you build anything, before you kind of work on things, you should be building an entity relationship diagram to understand how your data in your system is going to work and what your data structures should look like. But sometimes that's not always practicable. Sometimes you come into a project and there hasn't been an entity relationship diagram created, or there's one but it's significantly outdated. This tool massively helps with that. So using the entity relationship diagram, when you click on it, you get this. But you come in, you hit the load solutions button, and you go, hey, I want to find out the entity relationship diagram for, let's say this specific solution right here, the help desk ticketing system. And then I'm not going to tick any of these for now, but I'm just going to show you how it works. We click it, we hit create entity relationship diagram. We wait for it to do its thing. And there you go. Crowsfoot notation based entity relationship diagram created with primary keys and choice columns and a few other things already identified for me in terms of what are lookup columns. Those got our foreign keys in. We've got our primary key identified. We've got our relationship types identified by the crowsfoot notation. We can drag that about and move it. But very quickly, we can get an idea of what our entity relationship diagram looks like. And my personal favorite option in this tool is export to draw.io, which is the tool I use to draw my entity relationship diagrams. So very quickly, we can use this to draw entity relationship diagrams on a system that we've come into that we may not know how the data is structured, what the relationships look like, and if you're more of a visual individual when it comes to these kind of database mapping systems, this is really, really useful. But the other thing we have the option to do with this is if I hit load all entities, I'm going to let it run a bit, is I can choose, hey, I'm going to look at account, and I'm also going to look at, let's say, I'm going to go scroll down to user table. It's under system user there, and I'm going to hit create entity relationship diagram. You can very quickly ascertain where two tables are linked together and how they're linked together. So you can see there we've got a one-to-many between kind of the tables. It looks like we might have a many-to-many between them as well. So if you feel like two tables are related, you could go and check the relationships. But again, if you're more of a visual learner, you want to understand how the full system's loaded together in terms of what relationships are where, you could technically select all these tables and hit create relationship entity diagram, and it's going to build it for you. So it's a very quick tool to be able to kind of grab those entity relationship diagrams, view those relationships between tables, view what your primary key and lookup columns are within a table as well, and just be able to produce that documentation in a quick time frame. This tool has been slightly, to some degree, overtaken by the new view that you have available to you when you create new tables. But if I'm doing an entity relationship diagram for an existing solution, this is still my tool of choice and is one I come to quite regularly. Very, very useful. Well, that is the entity relationship diagram creator. Next one we look at, Fetch XML Builder. Now, if you do a Google search for the most useful tools in XRM Toolbox, Fetch XML Builder will more than likely be on that list. It is a brilliant tool. So when we're working with Dataverse kind of records, especially in Power Automate, we have the option to use Fetch XML and expand queries and a load of other things to be able to really refine down our searches and make them really, really crystal clear. Now, if you are, well versed in Fetch XML, that's great. Use it. But for those who are kind of just starting or maybe want to take a slightly quicker approach, Fetch XML Builder is brilliant for that. So when you come in, you're greeted with this kind of view here. What you need to be able to do is you need to come to Entity and select an entity. So here I'm going to choose the account table. And then you have options up here such as select attributes, attribute, filter, order, or link entity. In terms of select attributes, this is, hey, I want to see this column, this column, this column, this column, and this column. And then as we expand that out, we'll see that the columns appear beneath it. But I also want to be able to filter, and I want to be able to filter where, let's say, the account name, or name in this case, because it uses the logical names, equals, or let's say, contains, let's go testing. So I'm going to add that in, and you can see name in testing. So it's added the filter there. Now, if I go ahead and go, actually, when I look at account, I want to order them by a certain value. I want to say, hey, I want it to be where the account number is descending, and come back to account again. And right, okay, this is where things start to get interesting. We have this link entity piece. Now, what this allows us to do is be able to create fetch XML that goes away and gets related items. So items related to this account table. So now if I look at this, hey, these are all the many-to-one relationships. These are all the one-to-many relationships. I'm going to look at, let's say, task regarding object ID. And I want an inner link. And there we go. That's all well and good. We've got what we need there. If I hit execute, it's going to actually show me what I'm going to return. So you can see there, results view. But if I click onto Fetch XML, this tab up here, there's my Fetch XML pre-built for me. Again, another way we can speed up that development in terms of providing a low-code interface that allows us to configure what our filters are, what our expand queries are, what columns we want to select and other bits, and then be able to copy that and paste it somewhere else. This Fetch XML builder is also exceptionally useful again when we're looking at web resource scripts and some of the Procode kind of extensions. What it essentially allows us to do is quickly build these conditions that we can build into our JavaScript or TypeScript based code to then be able to do what we need to do and get the content we need to get. This one is very, very useful in both Power Automate and the Procode kind of web resource script area, purely because you can use the fetch XML in both of them. The only thing to be aware of with fetch XML over OData filtering is that fetch XML does not interact with calculated columns very well, or if at all. So just be aware of that. But in terms of this tool, very, very useful for building that fetch XML based upon kind of a low-code interface. And then we also have the option to convert it into things like SQL query or Power Automate parameters, which gives us our fetch XML output here, which you can copy and paste into a Dataverse kind of list rows action or get a row by ID action. So again, another way of very quickly putting together something that really refines down what our queries are and speeds up that process of development, meaning we don't have to write out all of these tags and these other bits. We can just configure it here and off we go. And that is Fetch XML Builder. Now we're now moving into two tools that I would say work very well together. These are to deal with plugins. This is more of the Procode element in terms of plugins for Dataverse, in terms of pre-operation, post-operation plugins. But it's worthwhile noting that these are here because they can be very useful. So the first one is plugin registration. Now, there is a process for registering a plugin inside of Tenants. There is also the plugin registration tool, which I'll show in a minute, which is Microsoft's own one. But the XOM Toolbox one is very, very helpful because what it does is it shows us all the plugins that we have in. We have the option to register new plugins, such as new assemblies, new packages, new steps. And we have the option to do it very, very quickly. So if I hit register new assembly, all I've got to do is find my assembly. Now I'm going to potentially cheat slightly here because I think I have one prepped and ready. So yeah, we find our assembly, and then we are able to basically upload that in using that new assembly, and configure it, and then add new steps. But once we've actually selected an assembly, so you see here I've got an assembly selected, we can see from this what the steps are within that assembly. So I'll just expand that out. These steps here, and we see a load of information about it in terms of what it can do and other bits as well, and we see the information from there. You can also manage your plugins from here in terms of being able to unregister them, update them once you've updated the actual code itself, and be able to add them to solution. The reason why I kind of put this one in here over and above the normal plugin registration tool is because of this option here, filter assemblies. You're able to filter down to exactly what assembly you want. Now, when we look at the actual plugin registration tool itself that is provided by Microsoft, now bear with me one moment when I swap that over. This is what you're greeted with in the Microsoft tooling rather than in the plugin registration tool that XOM Toolbox has. You have a blank screen. If I hit reload connections, obviously no organizations. I've got to go in and create a new connection here and log in. Of course, handy. Clearly, the demo is not working today, but in terms of what we have here, you would have a list of all of the plugins that have been added into your environment. You wouldn't be able to filter them, and you would only have a very few options in there. In terms of user interface, the XOM Toolbox version is a lot nicer, it's a lot simpler, and it makes it very clear where you go in terms of registering things, how to filter them, how to update them, and everything else. But that is the plugin registration tool, which very, very handy, very, very quick. Once you've actually coded your plugins and everything else, it makes it very simple. But once we've actually created our plugins, we then need to be able to view plugin trace logs. This is where plugin trace viewer comes in. Plugin trace viewer is needing an update, apparently. Plugin trace viewer is essentially a way for us to record what plugins have run in our environments and then see the messages that they have sent into the plugin trace logs. Now, for those who haven't worked with plugins before, essentially plugins are a pro code way of extending your platform. You can use predefined functions to be able to send what are essentially console messages into a trace logging area, and then you kind of view them in whichever way you choose to view them. I personally use this way because it allows me to select dates when the plugin ran, allows me to filter by the specific plugin themselves, the message or the entity that they were working on, and a few other things as well. And it makes the plugin trace logs very easy to view and very easy to read, because if you have multiple plugins working at once, so let's say you have 3 plugins that trigger off of the same record creation, this makes it very easy in identifying messages that are related to each plugin, but also messages that are related to an individual run within that plugin by providing a correlation ID that you can target and highlighting that in terms of a different color for each plugin run. Very, very useful. The other side as well is from here, if you're connected to a specific environment in the plugin trace viewer, you can actually change the plugin trace log setting for your environment from here. Very, very useful. You can set it to all. What it's going to do is it's going to give you a warning saying, hey, do you want to set this? You hit OK, job done. What you would normally have to do to be able to achieve that is go to the settings of your environment, go to the advanced settings, go into the classic view, and then navigate through, I think it's 3 different tabs to then be able to get to the trace log viewing option. So in terms of setting your environment up for plugin trace logging, that option there alone makes it worth it. Now, those are the tools that I use the most. There are a load of others, as you can see. I've got a few that I've used in terms of things like Auto Number Manager, Attribute Bulk Updater, Access Checker, and loads of others. if you're getting into the Power Platform space and you might be getting into the Pro Code area where you're starting to do web resource scripts that are JavaScript based or TypeScript based, or you're dealing with plugins, or you're starting to hit a point where you feel like you need to be able to do more filtering in terms of your Power Automate queries into Dataverse, there's probably an XRM XRM tool for that in XRM Toolbox in the tool library. Give it a search, find out what's there, take a dig around. There are some very, very useful tools in there. But that is XRM Toolbox as a whole. And the 6 most used tools that I use day in and day out. All very, very useful and very quick and easy to use. And most of them designed to just make our jobs as Power Platform devs that little bit easier. So, with those being explored, we are then going to move on to our next kind of useful tool, the PCF gallery. Now, a lot of the time when we're working with Power Platform, when you first start out, you work with the out of the box controls, right? You work with things like the gallery controls and other bits, but up to a certain point, you might then start to look into PCF controls. These are Power Apps Component Framework controls. These are Pro Code elements that are developed outside of kind of the Power Platform space, are code driven, and then are deployed. But when you're first getting into that, it can be quite daunting. You don't know what's possible with PCF controls. You don't know if there's a PCF control out there already that's available to you that could meet your need. Well, this is where PCF Gallery comes into play. So PCF Gallery is a website. This is the PCF Gallery. It has basically a list of Power Apps Component Framework controls that have been developed by the community for usage within kind of model-driven apps, Canvas apps, and other areas as well. It's added to relatively regularly, but you've got all sorts in here. Now, you'll see there's these little icons down beneath. Power Apps Component Framework controls aren't just for model-driven apps. For some of them, they have this little brush stroke which says, hey, we can use this in Canvas apps too. Now, if I hit search and I go to here, you can see that we've got the option for made for model-driven apps, made for Canvas apps, or made for Power Apps portals. That's obviously now Power Pages. But if we go into Manage Solution is available and made for Canvas apps and hit search, you can see here we've got things like Albanian XRM styled switch. Hey, now we can use this specific control inside our Canvas app. We can see a demo there and we can download it. Now, downloading it normally takes you to GitHub. You'd obviously clone the repository and then work on it from there. You've now got a PCF control. You've got an example code base for a PCF control that you can then potentially adjust, build upon, and work from. There are a few PCF controls in here that I have used myself. So there is one specifically. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. So this is to show kind of to the extent that PCF controls can bring in some additional. So drag and drop file uploader, I've seen that one be used before, but the one specifically, not that one, this one, SharePoint drag and drop PCF. So this one here, one is one I've taken before and I've built upon myself. It's been exceptionally useful. But what I would recommend is if you're getting into the PCF controls space and you want to see what's possible and what PCF controls are capable, come to PCF Gallery, take a look at it, see what's out there, and then maybe download something, have a play, see if you can get it to package up and work. That is the PCF Gallery in terms of a useful tool. It can be really good for inspiring new ideas. Talking of new ideas, one of the next things we should look at in terms of tooling is PNP Power Platform samples. So we're all aware that Power Platform has their own sample apps in terms of Power Apps, and we have some sample Power Automates as well. But actually, there's another website out there called PNP Samples, Power Platform Samples, which has a number of community-driven samples for Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Effects, and even Power BI. Now, taking a look at that, we can see here we have the Power Platform samples page. You can see we've got Power FX, Power Apps, Power Automate. There's none yet for Power Virtual Agents and Power BI. So if we look at Power FX, we can see we've got code snippets for things like square to circle collision detection. So someone's done a Power FX script that we can look at and see, hey, there's a solution. This is going to pick up whether something is colliding. Could be very useful for creating games inside of Power Apps. We have things like getting luminance, checking contrast. These are all Power FX code samples that you can then use within potentially your Canvas apps. If we click on Power Apps, we have a number in here for things like, hey, quality assurance assessments, progress bars, random dice rolls, timesheets, Wordle. Personally, the Power Wordle game, absolutely love it. Great. But these give us an idea in terms of design. So you can see there, Fluent UI for Teams theme. So quite regularly, I'll come in here to look for design ideas in terms of, hey, someone's built Fluent UI for Teams. How have they done that? What's the properties they've used? And kind of look at them and see how we can kind of use that. And then you can see things like Fluent UI custom theme. Very, very useful in terms of the Power Platform samples for getting an idea of what Power Platform is capable of, what Power Automate might be capable of, and some design ideas and Power Effects code that might be useful later. So I would recommend taking a look at this in terms of a toolkit that is there and available. Now, that is the session as it stands at the moment. We've covered the tools that we need to cover. So if we look at the agenda, we were supposed to cover XRM Toolbox. We've had an overview of that. We've gone through kind of the 6 most used tools, the PCF Gallery and the PnP Power Platform samples.
Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful and got to learn something new, and I'll see you in the next one.